very briefly, I'm going to use this opportunity to introduce our guest speaker for today, the keynote speaker, and I'll just go through a couple of slides so that we are all on the same plate. Build to Build is the title of our fundraising, and there's a clarion call of alumni to strengthen and scale up the college's structures and systems. Virtually all of us alumni, despite the difficulties and deficiencies in the systems and structures that built us up, we were built up by this system, and not only have we survived, we have thrived wherever we have gone in the world. For indeed, we were built to build. We have had a lot of posters released, but basically, Philip Ozuah, MD, PhD, is the Montefiore Medicine President and CEO. And this is an umbrella organization for the Albert Einstein College of Medicine and the Montefiore Health System's 13 member hospitals. And we can see all the other aspects: 300 clinical locations, 7.5 million patient encounters every year, and more than 8 billion in annual revenues. Philip Ozuah leads an organization with 10,000 physicians, 53,000 employees, serving a diverse group of patients. And he's an award-winning educator. So it's more like he's both a chief medical director of several hospitals and a provost of several medical schools, all put together. Before he rose up to this position, he was professor and university chairman of pediatrics at Albert Einstein College of Medicine and physician-in-chief of Children's Hospital at Montefiore. Philip, of course, we know, has in his role, he's very passionate about underserved communities, and he has recruited and cultivated outstanding talent, and advanced programs of excellence. We are an underserved community, and we're happy that Philip is reaching out to us today. And in his role as president and CEO, Montefiore Health System specialties have ranked the top 1% of the nation's hospital. So we are so glad to have him to speak to us this afternoon. He also leads the Albert Einstein College of Medicine, one of the nation's premier centers. And he has been recognized repeatedly as one of the top physician executives in the country. And of course, I mentioned earlier, Philip graduated from the College of Medicine, University of Ibadan in 1985. So distinguished ladies and gentlemen, our elders, and everyone that has joined, please welcome to give us a keynote address and also our fundraiser in chief, a distinguished alumnus, Philip O. Ozuah, MD, PhD.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Madam Provost. I am absolutely delighted to be joining all of you this morning, this afternoon, and wherever you are around the world. I'm going to share my slides now. Thank you. And so this afternoon in Nigeria and elsewhere, I wanted to just share with you a little bit of my story and take you on this journey with a few milestones along the way. The journey, of course, begins in 1985 when I graduated, as you heard, from the College of Medicine. This was the day of graduation with two of my classmates, Dr. Peter Sai, Dr. Tony Rapo, and the distinguished Professor Oladipo Akinkugbe, one of the giants of medicine in his time. And I remember as a very kind and nurturing teacher. So 1985, graduate from the College of Medicine, go on to do internship, and I mean, go on to do housemanship at UNTH Youth Corps in the Army, and then 1987, immediately after, come to the University of Southern California in Los Angeles to train with this gentleman, Professor Steve Abramson, who was the leading authority in the world in research in medical education, which was one of my passions. And I sought him out, and I came as his postdoctoral fellow, and also to work on a master's degree, as well as a PhD in education. So studied at USC, got my master's degree, and then was talked into taking a leave of absence from the PhD to go to New York. I'd met someone in Los Angeles while working on one of Dr. Abramson's projects, who began to talk to me and heard about my passion for using medicine to serve the underserved. And he said, you need to meet my classmate from Yale Medical School, who's in New York. And she recruited me to come to Montefiore as an intern. So spent 3 years as an intern. The plan was to go back to Los Angeles, but she offered me a faculty role and really persuaded me. She was a very inspiring, dynamic, charismatic leader, Dr. Shepard. And so I joined the faculty in July of 1992 at the end of my training. And in October 1992, Dr. Shepard dies. It turns out that she knew all along that she was dying, even though she was in her 40s. And she wanted me in place before she died. And she hid her illness from all of us, but persuaded me to stay on in Montefiore as a faculty member. Now, I started as a full-time clinician in community pediatrics. This meant that I did not have any time at all for research, for academic activity, for teaching. This was 9 sessions a week. If you each day has 2 sessions, morning and night, 9 sessions a week seeing patients, and 1 half day to do your paperwork on the patient. And yet, my goal was to become a full professor in the minimum permitted time. And that was 5 years at the assistant professorial rank and 5 years at the associate professorial rank. And even for those in the academic track, the average time was somewhere around 8 years in each of these stages. And so this was almost insane to have this go as a full-time clinician, but that was my goal and that was my ambition. Be the best doctor and get to full professorial rank in the minimum permitted time. Now, this was the setting where I worked. It was located in the poorest congressional district in the USA, so a very underserved community. And at the time, it had tuberculosis rates that were 5 times the national average. So I had only one option, and that was to make my daily clinical work also my scholarship, and to leverage all existing opportunities to create scholarship and to use evenings and weekends. So we used to test a lot of kids for TB, and this is how it began, the logbook at the nursing station. And I began to study what we were seeing in this logbook, what was happening with children, who was testing positive, who wasn't, and then began to write about these. So wrote about different things and strategies for increasing adherence. We created a model for showing that parents can read BPD results as well as doctors and nurses, and then went on. And now this paper came out, and I'll spend a minute on this paper, and you'll see why. There were multiple recommendations about which children should be tested annually versus not. And different schools have different policies, different states have different policies. and there were conflicting national guidelines. So the poor children and parents and the doctors were constantly confused about who should be tested versus not, and kids were being thrown out of school for not meeting one aspect of these guidelines. So I decided to design a study that would test these guidelines after finding that none of these guidelines had ever been validated. So we tested the positive predictive value, negative predictive value, specificity, sensitivity, well-designed studies. Sent the paper into JAMA. As everyone on this call knows, JAMA is the #1 clinical research journal in the US, the New England Journal of Medicine being the other. And I remember my boss at the time, my mentor, said, you're wasting your time sending it to JAMA. You're just going to spend 8 months there and they'll reject it. They wouldn't publish something. And I thought, no, this is a very important finding that's never been shown before in the literature. And so I sent it in, and believe it or not, 3 weeks later, I'm seeing patients and a call comes through from the operator saying that a Dr. DeAngelis is on the line. And Dr. DeAngelis was the editor-in-chief of JAMA, and she was calling to tell me that the reviewers were very excited about this paper and they wanted to rush it into publication the next week because the findings were so unique. And she wanted me to know that she was sending the reviewers' comments to me by overnight mail, and said, and I need you to respond within 24 hours. And if you could cut it down to 1,500 words. And I remember saying, I said, look, Dr. DeAngelis, I'll cut it down to 2 words, Philip Ozuah, if you get it published in JAMA. And this paper changed the practice of pediatric medicine in the United States. And suddenly I became a national expert in testing for tuberculosis. I put expert in quote because it was very unlikely that I would become a national expert. But then that led, but the reason why I was able to do this was because I'd studied the work of Ernest Boyer on scholarship, who wrote the seminal landmark paper defining scholarships, and talked about the 4 domains of scholarship: discovery, integration, application, and teaching. And then I also studied the work of Charles Glassick, who expanded on Boyer's work and talked about how you assess scholarship based on speaking to editors and printing presses and reviewers of grants, which, as you know, it's clear goals and objectives, adequate preparation, appropriate methods, important findings, effective presentation, and reflective critique, understanding the implications and the limitations of your work. And so I applied this discipline and this rigor to everything that we did, began to do more teaching, applied the same rigor to our teaching and our mentoring of trainees. I began to write paper after paper after paper, and in different things that we were doing in education and self-directed learning, professionalism of residents, and suddenly also began to have, going from somebody saying you could never get a paper into JAMA to now having single author papers in JAMA time after time after time. And I thought you would like this particular study. So this study came out of an observation that I made, which was that international medical graduates, essentially everybody on this phone call, had much better physical examination skills than US medical graduates. Now, this was anecdotal, it had never been shown or tested, and we designed a rigorous blinded study to test this using the criterion of 3 standard American textbooks, not British textbooks, American textbooks, and then measured a bunch of international graduates and American graduates. And you'll see here The international medical graduates are in maroon or dark red on the left, and US medical graduates are in yellow on the right. And this is the percent of residents or house officers, registrars that could perform these skills accurately. And you see the great disparity in international medical graduates performing significantly better than American medical graduates. Only 13% of US medical graduates could correctly locate McBurney's point when asked, versus about 95% of the total graduates. And these were some of the best students from US medical schools and some of the top medical schools, and many of them had honors. So this paper ended up in JAMA also, another very sort of, in a seminal description of something that many of us have probably observed. Then we went into full experimental design with problem-based learning, and just now we're on a roll. We're writing papers using unannounced patients, standardized patients, using time series, repeat measures, experimental design, things that people said couldn't be done in a real life educational setting. And we began to find ways to design rigorous experimental tests, even in the context of a housemanship, registrar, residency training. We developed, for example, the CD-ROM that we thought would have a certain impact on education and learning. So we created an experiment where we did another intervention to let everybody to believe that this was actually what we were testing, that was a sham treatment, and then had a pre-intervention period, introduced a CD-ROM, went on to post-intervention, and you have all of these phases that we could test and report. We created a CEC, which is a clinical encounter feedback card, gave it to students who would do, half of the students on outpatient, half on inpatient rotations, give the cards only to the ones on the outpatient setting. Then, 3 weeks in, they would, cross over. The inpatient went to outpatient, outpatient went to inpatient, give the cards to those that were inpatient, take it away from the outpatient, and so on. So now you're seeing crossover experimental designs in a medical education context, and these led to multiple papers coming out time after time. Asthma became a big issue, and we began to study asthma and also wrote paper after paper after paper, again, using the same rigor, the same application, began to mentor residents and fellows in research, and also produced prolific outputs from residents and fellows in this regard. I was then asked to take over as the program director of the residency program in social pediatrics. This was the primary care residency. Same way as I began in the most underserved area as a full-time clinician, this was a program that was the most struggling the most of all the other residencies. So you never get the easy assignment, as it were. And my goal was to make it the best training program in the US. Now, if you know where that began, again, very ambitious, almost crazy, and to use the benchmarks that the literature has used to define top training programs. And you can see where applicants went through the roof from, after a few years, some of the top medical schools in the US, diverse group of applicants, took the board pass rate from about 32% to 100% and kept it there for years. And the program a few years later was recognized by the Academic Pediatric Association as the best pediatric training program in the US. And that was in 2004. That led to my being appointed vice chair for clinical and educational affairs in the department. And 2.5 years later, I became the unified university chairman and physician-in-chief, chairman at the medical school, physician-in-chief at the hospital. Now, this is from a young man who showed up in New York, Montefiore, not knowing anybody at all in Montefiore. I didn't have a friend, I didn't have an uncle, I didn't have a friend of a family member, nobody. Showed up alone. And 3 years after I showed up, the director who recruited me passes away in an untimely way. So to go from that to becoming the unified university chairman, with 99% of the faculty were there when I came as an intern, and they were my teachers. And at this time, when I became the university chairman, I was the only Black man on the faculty. There were a couple of African-American women faculty members, but there was no other male Black on the faculty. So a little unusual. And we went from there, we recruited a lot of talent, as you heard, took our children's hospital that was unranked, unnamed, and brought it to be ranked as one of America's best children's hospitals in only a few years. Kept it still about patients. We made sure that the overriding principle was what's best for patients. I want to tell you about this young man. This was a young man that I met during the holidays, and we were filming a commercial that was going to run during the holidays. And his room, the nurses had told me about him. I wanted to come in and see him and film with him. And they took a long time to get him ready, because as you can see from the pumps on the right, he was very sick. And there was another rack with pumps that's not in the picture. So he was on multiple medication. He had a very, very difficult and tough diagnosis. And unfortunately, he came to us a little late. So waited almost 30 minutes for them to get him ready. And this is him when they've taken out all of the tubes, the nasogastric tubes and the oxygen tubes, so that he could, be in this commercial with me. I tell you that because this young man is from Nigeria, and his father was a young doctor who was trying to get into a residency in the US. And unfortunately, 1 month after this, this young man passed away. And I showed up at his funeral, and the parents almost fell down because they didn't think I even knew about his funeral, let alone showing up. And the father told me how for the last month, the only thing that brought him joy and made him smile the last month of his life was every time that commercial came on television and he saw himself on television. Just a reminder of why we do this, and that it's all about people, and it's about the patients. And yes, it is about people and the patients. And although we get rankings and national recognition, we never lose sight of what's most important. Based on this, the phone now started ringing nonstop. I was being offered jobs around the country to go run other hospitals, etc. And Montefiore said, no, we want you to become the chief operating officer for Montefiore. And a few years later, on this night at the Museum of Natural History, you can see it's filled to the rafters. I accepted the appointment as president and CEO of Montefiore. Now in Montefiore's nearly 200-year history, there have only been seven CEOs, and it was most unlikely that a young kid from West Africa would end up as CEO over Montefiore and Einstein. As you can imagine, none of the other CEOs that came before me looked like me. And there we were, suddenly president and chief executive officer of all of Montefiore, and you heard of the size and scale of Montefiore. Now, I thought I'd tell you a little bit of my experience as CEO. I think there are 5 dimensions of being CEO. You're a predictor, you're a builder, you're an ambassador, you're a communicator, and you're a determinator. Predictor, well, 4 months after I became CEO, March 11th, 58-year-old gentleman shows up to one of our emergency rooms complaining of fever and a cough. Within 1 hour, all of his organs failed. He's on a respirator. And this was our first patient with COVID-19. The next day, second patient comes in to the floor. 2 weeks later, we had 2,000 patients. A week after that, 4,000 deathly ill patients in hospital beds. So everything changed. Nobody could have predicted that. You become CEO, hoping for a little honeymoon, and the worst global pandemic in 100 years. Now, this is our grand hall, where one of our multiple meeting spaces and event spaces. This space we had to turn overnight. You can see from what you saw into this, to put patients in every available space. It became a war zone. Our people went there. This was how everybody looked for 1 whole year in the hospital: gowns, masks, shields, going through, and that our people performed with amazing bravery and dedication and diligence. And we came through that pandemic and saved tens of thousands of lives at great risk to themselves and their families. Predictor also means that you listen. You got to listen everywhere that you go. Listen to individuals, groups, sitting, standing, going around, constantly listening and paying attention. So you're a builder. You're opening new buildings, but you're also building science. You're building research. You're building cutting-edge basic research, clinical research. You're building clinical programs, getting the best, the latest, all the toys out there, all the latest cutting-edge equipment. You have to find a way to be able to afford these things and get not just one of them, but multiples of them, all through your hospitals and all through your system. You build community as well. Here we are, we do free COVID testing drive-through in the rain or shine. We do so many things to build community, including providing free food and groceries to thousands of families every week that come through, and we find a way to do all this, providing supplies and child care supplies, among other things. You're also an ambassador, a CEO. You represent the institution with law enforcement at sporting events, doing at the coin toss, at a football game, welcoming delegation from Congress and from the Senate, hosting. This is the current governor of New York. This is the current First Lady of the Dominican Republic, the current First Lady of the United States. You are an ambassador, and you're hosting and welcoming and representing the institution and the interests of the institution. You're communicating. You're out there all the time. You're speaking, small groups, large groups, everywhere, all day long. And you communicate also with your actions. This is serving meals during the holidays to our employees all day long, various campuses, various hospitals. And you're saying, I'm saying something by getting behind the kitchen counter and also serving meals. You make statements. This was a day when everybody in our organization knelt down for 9 minutes to protest against racial injustice. You probably can't see this, but I am in this group, leading that effort and standing with our people against things that could be better in the United States. You speak a day and at night. This was a vigil that we held at night, and also you speak out when you can. This is a New York Times editorial that I wrote, op-ed titled, "I fought 2 plagues and only beat 1. As the head of a major hospital, I fought the coronavirus. As a Black man, I fight racism," and bringing attention to issues of social justice and equity and fairness. You're in the media, radio interviews, television, more television, more television. You're out there, specials, Yankee baseball games, in the booth, again, speaking out, making your voice heard on every single US television channel, and also hosting your own show that sometimes. You're also the determinator. You're setting the direction of the organization with the senior leadership team, but you also set the direction of the medical school, as the provost mentioned. This is first day, our medical students going through what we call the white coat, the ceremony, and this is at the end. You preside over the white coat ceremony, and you preside over graduation at Carnegie Hall at the end. But overall, your job is to set the course of this widespread, rather large, complex health system. This is a measles map, I call it. There's every dot that you see there is a Montefiore location. And as you go north, all through New York, that's where we are. Multiple campuses. These are just some of our various locations, north, south, name it. We have hospitals everywhere. And these are just the various hospitals that are under our purview. This is our main campus. This is our medical school campus, a medical school and the medical school research building, one of the medical school research buildings. So those are the dimensions of being a CEO. But there was one that I didn't realize was required, and that's learning how to pose for selfies with tens of thousands of employees everywhere you go. You're posing for selfies no matter where you go, and that's a skill. You see, that this is outside. There's a line of people waiting to take this, and you have to be accommodating in the operating theater, whether it's they're doing cardiac transplant surgery. When you're there, you're posing for selfies. So I've taken you quickly through a year in the life of a healthcare CEO and through this journey, but it all began in 1985 here at the University College Hospital, Ibadan. And this was this young man in the anatomy lab who got all of the preparation that he needed there to go on and do everything else that came after. And I'll tell you what's one of the amazing things in life. When I graduated, when Provost and I graduated, the provost at the time, the acting provost, was Professor David Montefiore, the Goldsmith Montefiore. I was at Montefiore, it's pronounced Montefiore here, for 20 years before I discovered the connection. It turns out that Professor David Goldsmith Montefiore in the University College of Medicine, Ibadan, was the son of Dr. Nathaniel Montefiore, who was the son of Abraham Israel Montefiore, who was the younger brother and business partner of Sir Moses Hine Montefiore, after whom this hospital, over which I'm CEO, is named. I never thought that my British dean in my Nigerian medical school would have any connection whatsoever to my academic and clinical home in America for the last several decades. So there are mysteries in life, and you don't always know. So I want to thank Dr. Chinyere Obasi, another classmate who's been very diligent about keeping me connected to what's going on in the College of Medicine, Ibadan, and who gave me the contact information for our provost and my classmate, Provost Balayinka Omibodun. And I want to thank her for her leadership of the College of Medicine and for her grand vision of this built to build. I think it is absolutely exciting and absolutely the right vision. And I showed you this picture of our medical school. Now, you see on the right, there are 2 tall buildings that you see. There are actually 2 more buildings that are to the right of that, not in the picture. All of those are student housing. And so I understand the importance of student housing. And to that effect, I'm honored to be the fundraiser in chief, and I'm pledging to do everything that I can to help to drive this vision forward. And in discussion with the support of my wife and my children, I want to announce today that I will be pledging personally $1 million toward this effort, and we'll take it from there. Thank you very much.
Wow.
Fantastic. Absolutely fantastic. Truly fantastic. God have mercy.
Amazing.
Truly
Amazing.
amazing. Truly, truly amazing. Ah,
Wow. Unbelievable. Wow. Well done, Phil.
Wow.
Thank you, sir.
Well
Wow.
done, Phil.
I'm so
Wow.
absolutely.
Wow.
82.
Wow.
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 Great C82.
Wow.
C82.
Wow.
Phil.
Wow.
Hey,
Wow.
this is
Wow.
good.
Wow.
Hmm.
Wow.